This is Unit 3, Lecture 2. Now we're going to talk about vision. Last lecture, we talked about the difference between sensation and perception, and sensation is taking information in with the senses. This one, we're going to talk about vision. And then the next one, we'll talk about hearing. And the next one, we'll talk about kind of a combination of all the other senses to wrap up sensation. But here we're primarily going to focus on vision, which is very important because so much of the brain is dedicated to vision. Vision is our most dominant sense. For those of us who have it, it is the most dominant sense. It is the sense that we sort of give carte blanche to. We give, if it's between hearing it and seeing it, we go with what we see before what we hear, and what we see impacts what we hear, and vice versa. All right. So with that, how do we take what's going on in the world and do we turn it into energy? This is all about transduction, and transduction is converting one form of energy into another. Everything that we are experiencing in the world is a form of energy. Everything that that is happening into your eyes right now is energy based off the reflection of the amount of light you see. All right. Now, of everything going on, we really don't pick up that much. If you take a look at this graphic right here, of everything going on in the air right now, there are AC circuits, there are broadcast bands that if I put up an antenna, I could get a radio station. There's radar, there's microwaves, there's infrared rays that I could sometimes pick up, ultraviolet rays, maybe sometimes X-rays, gamma rays, cosmic rays. So the majority of the energy going on, we can't pick up. The only thing that we can really pick up is this little sliver right here, which is the visible light spectrum. And what we pick up of what's going on is not actual color, but it's the amount of energy that is being reflected off of something. For example, take a look at this heart right here. So we got a little heart right here. And we would look at this and we would go, well, this is the color red, correct? But what happens when I take this and push this here, suddenly the red becomes brighter. I turn this off and the red becomes darker, brighter, darker. So then the question becomes, what color is this truly? And it's what energy bounces off of it and goes into your eyes. As a matter of fact, the irony of all ironies is if I asked you what color this is, it is actually every color with the exception of red, because red is what bounces off of it and goes into your eyes. Red bounces off, it absorbs every other color. So when we're talking about color taking in or anything else, we're talking about the energy that is bouncing off of things. And we're talking about it in a way that's convenient for us as humans to see color. What we see the world as is not the world that cats see. It's not the world that dogs see. It is a world that has evolved to be convenient for humans to see in a particular way. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's the way the world is. Confused? Hold on. All right, so our eyes are not taking in color, they're taking in energy that we experience as color. And for someone who is colorblind, they're experiencing the world differently than those who are not. And who's to say, by the way, that a colorblind person isn't truly experiencing the world the way it really is, and maybe the rest of us are a little bit screwed up in that way. Another graphic right there for you. So this energy that we are taking in, and it comes into us in waves. There are different sort of wavelengths that go on. And the short wavelengths are going to be more blue, and the long wavelengths are going to be more red. So the longer the wavelength, the more red, the shorter the wavelength, the blue, and every color in between the red and the blue is a different size wavelength, whether it is longer or shorter, as a combination of those two. Now, when it comes to the intensity of the color, the more energy that a color has, whammo, the more energy, it's going to be brighter. The more energy that bounces off of this heart, the brighter the heart. The less energy that bounces off of it, the darker. More, less. And again, it gets back to what color is this really? Is it this color or is it that color? It's how much energy is bouncing off of it. So again, when I have a lot of energy bouncing off of something, it's going to be much bigger and it's going to be brighter. But when I have less energy bouncing off of it, it's going to appear darker. So a long, dull wave would be a dark red, yet a very high, short wave would be a bright blue, and others in between that. Now, as we're taking the energy in, and then we got to break it into all these little pieces and then put it together back in our head. The different parts of our eyes that are responsible for it. The cornea is a little transparent outer part of it right here, which is kind of the protector. Sometimes you'll hear people get injured, they have a scratched cornea. This can be reshaped during LASIK surgery a lot of times. I had LASIK surgery back in 97, 98 to reshape that. The pupil is the opening of your eye right here, and this is what allows energy to come in. And the size of your pupil is determined by the amount of energy that is hitting your eyes. There's a lot of energy hitting your eyes, your pupil is going to become smaller to limit that. If there is a less energy because it's darker, your pupils are going to become bigger. Also, when you're stressed, your pupils are going to become bigger because it needs to take in more energy to sort of determine what's going on. If you've ever had your pupils dilated, they put a little drop in there, which forces your pupil to become bigger and makes everything a lot brighter and a little bit out of focus, which is why the doctor will give you these little plasticky sunglasses to wear because of so much energy. The iris is the muscle around your eye, the color around your eye, which, by the way, doesn't mean much, although theoretically people would say that everybody with blue eyes is in some way related. Uh, the iris is the part that sort of makes it bigger or makes it smaller. It makes your pupil bigger or smaller. Some people would say that the pupil of your eye expands as much as 45% when you're seeing somebody that you love because you want more of that energy in. All right, so this responds to light sensitivity as well as sometimes inner emotions. There are some people whose eye color will change based on their emotions feeling at that particular time. Okay, so that's all kind of the outside of the eye. We get inside the eye, and now you've got your lens, and your lens is kind of the focal part. And this sort of can get impacted through accommodation with squinting. When something is far away, we may squint to try to affect the shape of the lens, or when something's closer, we may open up our eyes a lot more. Because the entire thing is we want to take this picture of something that we see a candle, and we want it to come into the lens in such a way that it reflects perfectly onto the back of our eye at a perfect spot. If this doesn't reflect here properly, if this lens is not focusing, and doesn't put it on this focus point where it should be, things are out of focus, and we don't want that. Okay, so the retina is everything on the back of the eye. So this entire thing on the back of the eye with all my rods and cones is my retina. And this is where we sort of begin the visual processing of information. Now, it's very important that what I'm looking at hits the retina where it's supposed to hit the retina. If it does not, that's where we have nearsightedness versus farsightedness. If you're somebody who is nearsighted, which means that I can see things up close fine, but things in the background are a little bit blurry, it's because your eyeball is a little bit long. Your lens is causing your focal point to be right here instead of back on the retina where it should be. Again, this little candle is being focused right there instead of back here where it should be. So what you'll do is you'll put the glasses on because the glasses will change your focal point back to where it should be. You'll notice a lot of times if you're nearsighted, you put on glasses, kind of pushes things away, which makes things a little bit more clear. Most people, especially younger people, are diagnosed with nearsightedness because the number one complaint as a kid is I can't see the board. The opposite of this is farsightedness, and farsightedness means I can see things far away in very clear focus. It's things up front that seem to be a little bit harder. Reading gives you a headache, things like that, because your focal point is too far into the back. It should be up here. So again, your lens is causing your focal point to be back there. So you want to put glasses here, which will pull your focal point forward. Less likely to need glasses for this because a lot of people over accommodated with squinting and whatever and headaches and whatnot. Far less common that farsightedness is diagnosed because of not as many complaints about it because we tend to accommodate for it. All right. Now, when it comes to everything going on back on the fovea, is where we're sort of producing the focus and the color. Fine detail color vision is done by cones. So our cones are responsible for color. We've got 3 different colored cones. We've got red cones, we've got blue cones, and we got green cones. And the reds and the blue, every color that we see is a combination of red, blue, and green. I know this can throw us off a little bit because we go, but is it yellow a primary color? No, it's in here. It's red cones, it's green cones, and it's blue cones. Those are the ones that their job is to take all the little pixels, and we got millions of them, and they're taking that in. Then we've got rods, and rods are the blacks and the whites. And we've got about 20 rods for every cone we got. So we got millions of cones, but then we've also got these rods. We got about 10 rods for every single cone that we have. So 7 million cones and about 100 million rods that help us see better in the dark. The rods are for black and whites. The rods are for when there's not a lot of color and we need shape and everything else. Rods are better for our peripheral vision, which again, our peripheral vision, which can pick up movement, but it doesn't pick up a lot of detail. Cats have a higher number of rods, allows them to see better at night. Cats also tend to have bigger pupils, which allows them to see better at night. They got more energy coming in, and they're taking that energy in. For example, you and I, if we went out at night and we looked at a kind of dusk sort of a scene, it would look kind of like this, where we don't see a lot of color, so our cones aren't really working, and our rods would pick up this sort of detail. Now, a cat who has more rods would take this and turn it into a brighter scene. And this is why cats can go around at night a lot better, but also notice that it's fuzzy. The details aren't as great. Even though they can sort of see it more clearly, it's not a lot of detail going on, but this is why cats tend to be more of nighttime creatures. Now, so the fovea is the focal point. So as I'm looking at something and I'm sending it back, this is the focal point of where my eyes are. It's 5% of the retina's area, but 50% of my visual cortex is dedicated to this focal point as I'm taking information in. All right, and this is where transduction occurs. This is where the rods and the cones break down everything into little tiny electrical signals, and I zip it back to my brain, and then my brain puts it together in my occipital lobe, taking all the colors, but then my memories of where I've seen those things before and everything else puts together the vision of what I see in about a fraction of a second. Now, when it comes to my focal point is very, very, very clear because there's much more of the occipital lobe that is dedicated to that and breaking it down and everything else. When somebody is looking straight forward, this is a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy going on right there. So it's very clear, again, about what I can see in a quarter, very, very detailed. But then as we get further and further away from my focal point, my vision becomes a little bit less accurate and it's a little bit more fuzzy. And I'm just sort of looking for movement. I'm not seeing a lot of detail and it's a little bit more blurry. And the faster I go, if I'm 15 to 25, my peripheral vision is really only sort of working out there. But as I go 70 miles per hour, my focal point becomes even finer and my peripheral vision becomes even weaker. So again, I'm not going to pick up as much detail or everything else on that. I can see movement, but I can't make detail of what that movement is. And that's also why people outside of our main vision, and we can't see their pupils moving around, they're in our peripheral, we assume everybody is looking at us. And that's sort of the spotlight effect we have. It's the paranoia that we have. We always have this feeling that someone's watching me because if I can see anything of their eyes, their pupils could be pointed that way, but I assume the pupils are pointed at me because I can't make out the details of their pupils. So again, this is my central vision, and the further I go from my vision, the more blurry it becomes, which is why we're never focused on one point. My eyes are here, then they're there, then they're there, and I take in all these details and I put together a picture which seems like a very, very steady thing going on. My eyes are always dotting around. I give you an example of this. When we take a look at this in our peripheral vision, we notice it's a lighter green and a darker green. If I stare at this dot right here, even in my peripheral vision, lighter green, darker green. Now, when it's not as defined, we look over here and I've got lighter green and I've got darker green. Light, dark, fine, no problem. But then if I focus and stare at the dot and keep staring at the dot, out of my peripheral, that tends to be just one green. And I don't see the difference in the detail because it's not as defined. My peripheral vision is not good for details. And again, my peripheral vision will sometimes make up things that aren't there. Stare at this little white dot and you'll see that it's white. Stare at this white dot, you'll see that it's white. Stare at that. Stare at any of these individual white dots and they're white. Stare at one white dot And in your peripheral, it seems like there's a bunch of flashing dots going on. Flashing dot, flashing dot, flashing dot, flashing dot, because what it's doing is it's dragging the energy from one to the other, to the other, to the other. This is focused. White doesn't move. All the blinking is occurring where I'm not looking. Here, focus there. Now blinking's occurring down here. Focus there. Now blinking's occurring up here. And it's occurring in our peripheral because our peripheral is not as accurate. Same thing here. We take a look at this. There's nothing there. 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 Stare at this, and there's flashing dots that are occurring between because it's my peripheral vision dragging stuff in there, making things up because I can't take in the details. Same thing going on there. If I were to count the green dots, when I look directly, okay, I can see it. I can see it. I can see it. Oops, let me move myself out of here. I can see it. I can see it. But then out of our peripheral, some of these start to disappear and it's harder to see. And to try to count all the green dots is a little bit difficult. And if you focus and you look, the number is 23. It's 23 dots. And it's easy when you sort of put them together. But then when I look over here, my peripheral can't get out these details. And again, that's how camouflage and things like that sort of work. All right. Another interesting one right here. If I take a look over here, it's broken, it's broken, it's broken, it's broken. But if I stare at the center and focus at the center and focus only at the center, suddenly the brokenness to the side tends to disappear because I don't see the details of the brokenness sort of happening. Okay. So the optic nerve of my eye is like a sink. Okay, so I've got all these nerves that have, or I've got all this information that's got to be sent to my brain. So it's like going down a sink, and everything goes down into it goes down into your sink and goes down into the drain. So that drain, if everything in the sink is going down to the drain, everything in my eyeball is going to this drain. That drain has no stainless steel on it, so that's got no rods. It's got no cones. So it's not cones. So it's not taking in information. All right. So there's part of my eye that in fact cannot see because the optic nerve is taking that information down. And this is what is your blind spot. Your blind spot is the part of your eyeball that actually cannot see. Your left eye has a blind spot. Your right eye has a blind spot. But since we've got two eyeballs, most of us, then the left makes up for the right makes up for the left. Give you an example of this. All right. We've got a dot over here. What I need you to do as you look at this is to take your left hand, cover up your left eyeball, and with your right eye, stare at the dot. Well, for you guys will be staring at the dot down there. Stare at the dot with your right eye. So just look at the dot, look at the dot, look only at the dot. And then what you will notice is as the dot goes back and forth, for a brief flash, it disappears and comes back. Bounces, goes away, comes back, bounces. That's your blind spot. But when you look at it with both eyes, it's right there. This is the part of your eye where the optic nerve is taking in information and your retina and your cones aren't creating any information. All right, so now let's take a look at how the eye works overall. How do we gather up all this information? Well, what we're doing is we're taking in 107 million receptor rods and cones, are taking in all this information transmitted by millions of ganglion cells, and we're taking all these little pieces and we're breaking them apart and we're shooting them back to the eyeball. And all these little millions of pieces per second are being shot back to our eyeball. And our eyeball has to break it down. So our eyeball has to take, where have I seen this stuff before? All right, and this is what is called feature detectors. And feature detectors is how do I take this stuff and combine it with something I've seen before. For example, when we see the letter T, we don't see the whole T because my rods and cones are breaking it down into pieces. So as I take a look at the T, I go, is this piece there? No. Is this piece there? No. Does it have one of these? It does have one of those. Does it have one of these? It does have one of those. Does it have one? Nope. Does it have one of these? Does it have one of those? So I've got different parts of my feature detectors are responsible for looking at these features. And when these features are stimulated, as they are with the T, these aren't stimulated, those don't react, these do react. So we start to put them together and we go, okay, is this a P? No. Is this an R? No, it's a T, because I've seen a T before. So I take all this information, I put it together, and I break it down to the way I've seen it. Again, when I see the word features, I don't break it down into an F and with the cross across and the E and the A and the T with the cross and a little bit of a curve and the U coming down and the R just a little bit, but not all the way, and the E with the perfect little almost an O. I don't break it. It's just the word features, because I've seen the word features 1,000 times. I take it to where have I already seen this thing? Where have I already seen these letters? And this is why, again, reading something in my native language is very easy. Reading something in Arabic a little bit hard because I don't have feature detectors that have the experience of seeing those different things. Okay, so when you talk about somebody that has something like prospaxia, that's a neurological disorder where I can't recognize faces. It's also known as face blindness because your feature detectors for faces has in fact been injured. All right, so I've got all these feature detectors throughout my brain that are responsible for seeing these different things. It's visual encyclopedia. I've seen a heart before. So when I see one of these, it's not hard for me to know what that is. But when I see something that's unusual or something I've not seen before, it takes me a little bit more time to process it. This basketball, very easy for me to see. Orange, stripes, round, everything else. Even though it's a little bit smaller, I know this is a basketball because I've seen basketballs before. I know that these are scissors because I've seen scissors before. It's not like every pair of scissors I've seen, but it's scissors. That's easy to process that, but new things, more difficult to do. Now, again, as I mentioned before, our eyes do not focus on one thing. Because if we focus on one thing, our focal point would be great, but our peripheral vision isn't taking this stuff in. This is why my eyeballs go all over the place. When I see an H and a B, you know, I see the H, I see the B, I see the 3, then I put them all together. When I see a face, I take in this part, I take in this part, I take in this part, and I put it all together. You know, when you show this, I show that, you know, I pick up this feature and that feature and that feature, and then my brain takes it all and puts it all together. Okay, so again, my perception is taking in all these pieces and putting it together in a certain way that makes sense. And although sensory adaptation reduces our sensitivity to this, we don't perceive the world as it exactly is. We perceive the world in the way that we put it together. And the way we put it together is based on experience. And again, we go back to if you have experience with the French language and somebody is speaking in French or you see French words, you're going to process those. You know those features, the little schwa sound or whatever else. You know that better than other people do. This is why you cannot see your eyes move while you're staring in the mirror. Because when you're staring in the mirror, you're looking at you, but you can't look away. You can't notice. I can notice my eyes look up here because I'm not looking at the camera. I'm looking at my picture over here. Well, for you guys, it would be over there. So I can see my eyes move here, but I can't see my eyes move when I'm looking in the mirror because once I look away, I'm not looking at myself anymore. And that becomes my peripheral vision, which I assume is looking at me. So when my eyes are looking at a picture, I'm not focused just here. There's a little bit of time here, a little bit of time. I take in all these different things and then I put it together in a stable image. It's like when you take a video with your camera and it seems to sort of move around all over the place because first off, our hands aren't that steady. We're taking it all, taking a little of this, 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 and this. And then so it looks shaky when we see that. But when I experience the world, it's just the world, even though my eyes are going all over the place and putting together a picture. I put it together in my brain as a nice, steady, the world. Okay. Now, the other thing about our brains are kind of slow compared to a computer. A computer is much faster than the human brain. But the trick is we don't have millions of computers. I've got a computer I'm working with. The brain, I've got millions of different cells working on millions of different things with millions of different features and millions of different responsibilities. You get on the computer, you open up, you're on the internet, you open up 8, 9, 10 web pages, your computer starts to act slow because it can't do multiple things at the same time. I've got parts of my brain that are designed for color. I've got parts of my brain that are designed for features. I got parts of my brain that are designed for shape, parts of my brain that are designed for motion, parts of my brain that are designed for depth, parts of my brain that are designed for all these different things. So I'm doing them all at the same time, and then I'm putting this thing together and then shooting it out. And again, I'm doing this in like 4/10, 5/10 of a second. Not in the true moment, but I'm a little bit behind. But that's still pretty impressive, the way that we parallel process. So when I take this information and there's something happening, my cones and rods break it down into little pieces. My feature detectors go, where have I seen those pieces before? My brain goes, okay, now let's take all those pieces and put it into something that's actually going on. And then I recognize what I see. And I'm doing that every moment that my eyes are open. That's how I process information. Now, when it comes to something like color, let's go with color again. Do we all see color the same? Of course we do not. Again, this looks like a red heart. So you would go, what color is this? This is red. But it is actually every color but red, because red is what is bouncing off and boing, boing, and bouncing off back into your eyes. So you're seeing red because it actually doesn't process red. When you look at a banana is every color with the exception of yellow, because yellow is what is bouncing off of it. All right. And again, the more energy that I put on this, the brighter it becomes. More energy brighter, less energy darker. More energy brighter, less energy darker. So it doesn't actually have a physical property. It's what amount of energy is bouncing off of it. Couple of theories about color. One is what is called the trichromatic theory. And the trichromatic theory basically says we have red, we have green, and we have blue cones. Not yellow, red, green, and blue. And then what happens is, according to how much those cones are in fact stimulated, will be how much energy is bouncing off of them. And as a result, will be what color we see. The more blue cones that are stimulated, the more blue something is. The more green that is stimulated, the more green it is. The more red is stimulated, all these. And if I mix all the colors together, the more colors I mix together, the brighter it actually becomes, because it's more energy, which is the opposite of a painter's palette. You put all your colors in a painter's palette together, and it's like a dark brown. But the more colors I stimulate, the more cones are going on, the brighter things actually become. That's the trichromatic theory. But then the question becomes, well, what about colors that don't exist? Because yellow's created because we got the green cone. If I got the green cone here, let me move myself. Green cone here, red cone here. I stimulate a lot of green and a bit of red. And by doing a lot of green and a bit of red, we combine those and we get a little bit of yellow. And yellow is created as a combination of these two colors. All right, and then green and the blue is going to give me that little stuff right there. And it's going to give me all the different colors, a little bit more red than green. And I'm over to the oranges and blah, 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 blah. So that's making all of these colors. But there's some colors that actually don't physically exist because well, not physically. The energy doesn't even exist. They're not on the color spectrum. For example, if I look from here, the darkest of blues to the darkest of reds, where's the color? Kind of a pinkish magenta. It doesn't exist. The color magenta doesn't exist on the color spectrum. It's between short blue and long red waves, but it's kind of like going around here to get to here. Because just, again, red and blue is going to give you in this yellowish area. It doesn't exist on here. It's a combination of those two. So what the human brain does is it combines red and blue and it creates magenta. It makes up what it assumes should be there, because even though it can't be between these two, it comes around on the other side of the spectrum. It's kind of weird. Sometimes we make up colors that would make sense, even though it may not. The energy doesn't physically exist. Our brain sort of puts it there. Strange. Okay, now when it comes to color blindness, this is people with the red and the green and the blue cones. Some of them aren't firing the way that they're supposed to. We talked about this when we talked about evolutionary psychology. 8% of men, 1% of women, it's a hereditary condition of being colorblind. Women less likely, because women back in caveman days, their job is to get the berries and everything. You get the wrong colored berries, your family dies, the DNA doesn't go forward. Men not as responsible for it, some men, more of them could slip through the cracks. When we take a look, and again, it's because your cones aren't working correctly. This is normal vision right here. Somebody that has a red deficiency, notice that her hair doesn't become red and we lose the blouse right there. You have a green deficiency and you sort of lose the grass and whatnot. A little bit different there. If you've got a blue and yellow deficiency of your color, you'll notice again that I don't have the yellow of the blouse, and I'm also sort of missing a little bit of the color right there as well, and a little bit with the details as well. So those are the different deficiencies that you have. Now again, how we see color. Most of us, when we take a look at this right here, we see the number 74. It's no problem. 74, 74, no big deal. But somebody who's colorblind can't tell the differences between their greens and their reds, and their 7 and 4 is a little bit harder to dispute. Most of us see a frog like this. Someone who's colorblind sees it like this. By the way, we're all born colorblind. We pick up these colors as we go along. This is what a human sees. It's the color spectrum of a human. This is what a dog sees. Okay, a dog doesn't pick up oranges and reds. This is why sometimes when you take that green tennis ball or that yellowish green tennis ball and you throw it across the green grass, the dog runs right past it sometimes. You don't see it. This is why my dogs, they prefer blue toys. I always give them blue toys whenever possible because it stands out to the other colors that they naturally pick up. This was an issue back when the NFL had what were called color rush games. And color rush games back in 2015 was they wanted to sell more jerseys. So they would have teams wear their primary colors. So in this game right here, you got the New York Jets playing the Buffalo Bills. Jets and the Bills, Jets wear all green, Bills wear all red, no big deal, right? Unless you're colorblind, then it looks like you can't tell the difference between the reds and the greens, and it's just a bunch of guys in the same color jerseys with helmets that are both white with a little logo across them. And it was really hard for people to sort of pick up which team was what. I mean, come on, watching a Bills Jets game is going to be frustrating enough, but you can't tell which team is what. And again, some animals' color blindness actually helps them out. That's one theory of color. Another theory of color is what is called the opponent process theory. The opponent process theory means that each color has an opposite color. The opposite of red is green, the opposite of blue is yellow, the opposite of black is white, and vice versa. This is why if you've ever developed photos, you get what is called a negative, then you flash the energy of white through it, and it gives you the opposite colors on the other side of it. For example, we take a look at this flag, stare at the dot, look at the dot, focus only on the dot. Now, what's basically happening as you focus on the dot is your opposites are wanting to take over. For example, your cones, as you stare at the dot, the cones in your eyes that are responsible for all this sort of greenish blue that's going on right here are getting very, very tired, and they're just getting tired of working, so that it's getting time for the red to take over. And your cones that are over in the peripheral vision of your eye right here that are picking up the yellows are getting very, very tired, and they want the opposite blue to take over. And of course, black is going to be white. So if we stare at the dot, stare at the dot, stare at the dot, then we take that away, and we've got the American flag. The opposite colors showing up. And to show you on xenophobic, same thing here. Your greens are going to become reds, your yellows are going to become blues, your blacks with the energy of white is going to show up. And if we stare and stare and stare and stare at that, and I take it away, you're flashed with the British flag. Okay, now here's some other ones. And again, this is a negative image. Stare at either her nose, or her nose. And this is what negative film looks like. Just to choose one and stare at the nose, stare at the nose. Put all of your focus on the nose. Then what I'm going to do is, as you put all the focus on the nose, what's happening is that the opposite cones are getting very, very tired. And as the opposite cones are getting very, very tired, stare at the nose, stare at the nose, stare at the nose. As the opposite cones are getting very, very tired, when I take this away and flash it with white, you get the opposite image that appears. Not as clear, but it does appear. And again, if we take a look at this, let me just get one set of cones tired, all right? So we take a look at this black and white tiger. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tire your blue cones. Stare at the cross, stare at the cross, stare at the cross. And now your blue cones are getting very tired, which means your reds and your greens want to come out. Your reds and greens are responsible for oranges. So as I continue to make your blue cones tired, stare at the cross, stare at the cross, stare at the cross. And it's better if you stare at it for like a minute. So if you want to pause the video, stare at it longer, that's fine too. But we stare at the cross and we take this away and we put the black and white image back up, and which is going to make the reds, yellows, and oranges more vibrant and greens more vibrant. You had color on that tiger for a little bit. Okay, don't worry about that one. So again, stare at the dot. I'm going to just replace a bunch of these with black and white images. Okay, stare at the dot, stare at the dot, stare at the dot. And then what I'm going to do is I'm making your cones here tired. I'm going to give you the opposite. I'm just going to give you a black and white, and the opposite colors will appear momentarily and then go away. Take a look at this dot right here. You stare at it, stare at it, stare at it. Then I'm going to show you a black and white image. And what's going to happen is that black and white image for a brief moment will have color. And then it goes back. You take a look at this one. Stare at the star, stare at the star, stare at the star. And again, it's better if you look at it for like 30 seconds and really get your cone tired. You stare at the star, stare at the star. And then you switch to the black and white image. You've got color for a little bit. And then we come over here and we take a look at this. Why is my cat? My cat's complaining. We take a look at this, and your opposite cones are going crazy right now. And I give you the black and white image, and you've got the color right there. Come here, kitty. And then what you also have is color constancy as well. Let me grab this one right here. Hang on. So when we're speaking of this, this is one of my cats. Big fat kitty cat. This cat, if you take a look, the cones, look up, There you go. Got the big old pupils. So the cones are a little bit bigger, those little blue eyes. So this kitty right here doesn't see color as well. Big, big, fat kitty cat. This is the little one. This is my little kitty cat right here. But he's a little bit bigger. He's a complete. He's a good kitty. He's a little bit bigger. All right. So anyways, sorry. He's complaining to me. Now, color constancy is how constant is the color. We perceive familiar objects and we want to put them in a way that makes sense to the world. For example, we take a look at this right here. This looks like a darker shade of gray. This looks like a white that's in a shadow. We see the shadow here. We assume the sun's coming up here. We assume that it's kind of like a folded flip phone going on here. And so this is in the sunlight. This is a dark gray in the sunlight. This is a white in a shadow. So we assume that this is a darker gray and that is a brighter white, because it's all based on what we assume to make sense. But if I took away this right here, it looks like both shades of gray are exactly the same. Put that there, they're different, same, different, the same. We take away those details and it gives you a different sense of it. Same thing here. This shade of gray and this shade of gray are exactly the same. But because of what surrounds it, because of our assumption of this shadow and all these other things, we think that this is a dark gray. We think that this is just a bright white and shadow, when in fact, A and B, same when you connect them. Same when you connect them. Constancy, what's around it. Now to show you this will really flip you out. Take a look at this as they move it from the light to the shadow, from the shadow to the light. It's the same shade of gray. They're not flipping the pictures. Any change that you see happening in that gray is happening in your mind, because your mind is changing it to a color that makes sense. So again, this idea of does color exist, does shape exist, and all these other things. So that wraps us up for this lecture right here. And by the way, here's another one. If you stare at the cross, focus on the cross, all that's happening is you have a dot that's disappearing. But if you stare at the cross, your peripheral vision, which can't make the adjustment as quickly, is suddenly seeing a green dot being chased around. There's no green dot. That's all in your mind. Next time, we're going to talk about your hearing, and we're going to tell you to keep those damn Q-tips out of your ears.